The year was 1888, and the New Mexico desert was a forge. Luke Harlan knew this because the sun was the hammer, the anvil was the baked alkali flat, and he was the piece of iron being beaten thin. He had been walking for 2 days, or maybe 3. The sun had burned the numbers right out of his head. He was 22 years old, but he felt like a century. The wound in his side was a hot, wet mouth that pulsed with every step. It was not the bullet that was killing him. It was the thirst. His tongue was a piece of dried leather in his mouth, too thick to swallow with. He stumbled over the carcass of a horse. It was one of theirs. Bloated, stiff-legged, its eyes pecked out by the vultures that still circled overhead, patient as priests. The ambush had been fast. They had been tracking the Sandoval brothers for 3 weeks, pushing hard for the $500 bounty. They got sloppy. The Sandovals were not sloppy. They were waiting in the rocks, hidden in the shimmer of the heat. Luke remembered the crack of the first rifle. He remembered Jed sliding from the saddle, a neat black hole in his throat. He remembered his own horse screaming as a bullet shattered its leg. He had fired back, emptying his Colt into the rocks, but he was shooting at ghosts. Then the fire exploded in his side, knocking him from the dying animal. He had crawled. He had crawled until the shooting stopped, and the only sound was the wind, a hot, furious wind that scraped the dust from the bones of the earth. He was the only one left. He had run or staggered, leaving his rifle, his saddlebags, and the last of his water. He had only the pistol on his hip, empty, and the throb in his side. Now he fell. The rocks were sharp, but they were hot, impossibly hot, as if they had just been pulled from a fire. He lay on his back, staring up at the white, merciless sky. This was it. This was the end. He thought of his mother, dealing cards in a dusty saloon in Dodge, her laughter sounding like broken glass. He thought of his father, a man he barely remembered. Shot dead over a $10 pot. It was a stupid, empty way to die. He closed his eyes. The wind howled, covering him in grit. He awoke to shade. This, he knew, was impossible. There was no shade. There were no trees, only the skeletal arms of Ocotillo and the thorny mass of Cholla. Yet the sun was not on his face. He felt a coolness. Water. He forced his eyes open. They were cracked and glued shut with dust. He blinked, and the world swam into focus. A face. It was a woman, kneeling beside him. Her skin was the color of the red rock, her hair black as a raven's wing, pulled back tight. She was not white. She was Apache. Luke's hand, raw and shaking, went for his holster. It was empty. The woman watched him, her expression unreadable. She held a damp piece of cloth. She had been wiping his face. She pressed it to his lips, and he sucked at the moisture, a desperate animal sound. She rose. She was taller than he expected, thin but strong, wearing a simple cotton dress that had been patched many times. She looked down at him, not with pity, but with something like resignation, as if he were a sick animal she had found on her doorstep, and she was annoyed by the inconvenience. Tala found him near the rock cleft, where she gathered roots. He was unconscious, his lips split and black. He was white and young. His hair was the color of dried corn silk, matted with blood and sand. She had stood over him for a long time. A white man dying in this land was not a tragedy. It was the natural order. This land drank their blood and baked their bones, and she felt nothing when she saw it. They came, they took, and they died. Her husband had taught her that. The settlers who came after had proven it. She saw the wound. It was festering, the edges of his shirt stiff with black, dried blood. He was burning with fever. She should have left him. It was the sensible thing. He was a threat. If he lived, he would bring more of them. If he died, the coyotes would have him by morning. But she did not leave him. She looked at his face, slack in its unconscious plea, and she felt the ghost of an old feeling. It was not compassion. It was heavier. It was the burden of living when others had died. She spat on the ground. Then, with a grunt, she hooked her arms under his and began to drag him. He was heavy, a dead weight. It took her nearly an hour to get him back to her shelter. A small hut of rough-hewn wood and adobe, built low against a rise of red rock. She pulled him inside, out of the sun, and let him fall onto the packed dirt floor. For a moment, she did nothing, just breathing hard, staring at the problem she had created for herself. Then she went to fetch her medicines. Luke woke to pain, a sharp, searing fire that was not the sun. It was in his side. He gasped, and his eyes flew open. He was in a small, dark room. The air smelled of dust, dried herbs, and smoke. A low fire burned in a small hearth, casting flickering shadows. He was on a pallet of blankets, and the woman was beside him. She was holding a knife. The blade heated in the fire. He yelled, a dry croak, and tried to scramble away. The panic seizing his heart, he thought he was captured, that she was here to torture him, to finish what the Sandovals started. She did not flinch. She simply placed one hand flat on his chest, and the strength in that small hand was shocking. It held him down as if he were a child. "Be still," she said. Her voice was low, rough, like stones rubbing together. "The bullet lead is poisoned." He stopped fighting, breathing hard. He watched, terrified, as she lowered the hot knife to his wound. He screamed as it touched him, the smell of his own burning flesh filling his nostrils. She worked quickly, her face a mask of concentration. He felt the probe, the digging, and then a terrible, sucking relief as the metal shard was pulled free. He fell back, panting, slick with sweat. She dropped the mangled piece of lead into a bowl. "Where?" he whispered. "Who are you?" Her head snapped up. Her eyes were black and hard. "You will not ask me questions?" I mean no harm." "You are white," she said, as if that explained everything. "You mean harm by breathing." She stood and went to the fire, cleaning the knife. The silence in the small hut was absolute. "Do not ask of me," she said, her back to him. "Do not ask of my husband. Do not ask of my children. Do not ask of my village. Those things are ghosts. You will not speak to them." The order was so cold, so final, that Luke felt a chill despite the fever. He was weak, helpless, and at the mercy of a woman who clearly despised him. "My name is Luke," he offered, his voice empty. "Luke Harlan." She did not turn around. "My PA," he continued, rambling, desperate to fill the silence, to prove he was a person. "He was shot by card sharps in Abilene. My ma, she works in a saloon, took up with a tin-horn gambler." He coughed, a dry, racking sound. "I was riding with a bounty outfit, just for the pay. There ain't much else." He told her this because it was the truth, and the truth was all he had. He was nothing, a piece of tumbleweed blown in by the wind. He had no people, no home. Tala remained perfectly still. She gave no sign that she had heard him. She did not care about his lost father or his fallen mother. She returned to him, not with words, but with her work. She took a wad of dark, pungent herbs and pressed them deep into the cleaned wound. This time, Luke did not scream. He only hissed, his fists clenching the rough blanket. She took strips of cloth, dyed a deep brown with boiled bark, and began to wrap his ribs, pulling the bindings tight. Her hands were rough, but her movements were sure. She worked on his body as if it were a piece of leather she was mending. She tended the fever, forcing bitter-tasting water between his lips. She never spoke. The days and nights blurred. Luke drifted in and out of the fever. Sometimes he was back in the ambush, the smell of gunpowder thick in his nose, and he would wake up shouting. She would be there, a dark shape in the dim light, holding him down until the shaking passed. The world shrank to the four walls of the wooden hut. The silence of the high desert valley was deaf-sinning. There was no sound of wagons, no cattle, no voices, only the wind, which never seemed to stop, and at night, the high, thin howl of a coyote, a lonely sound that echoed off the canyon walls. He watched her. She moved with a quiet economy. She wasted no motion, no word. She would leave at dawn, disappearing into the blinding light, and return hours later with roots, water from some hidden spring, or sometimes a snared rabbit. She cooked, she mended, she worked, and she ignored him. He was a stone she had brought into her house. He was just there. One night, the heat broke. A storm rolled in, rare and violent. Rain hammered the wooden roof like gunfire. Luke woke, not from the fever, but from the chill. The fire was burning low, just glowing embers. He was clear-headed for the first time. The pain in his side was a dull ache, not a raging fire. She was there, kneeling beside him. The rain drummed overhead, masking any sound she made. She was unwrapping the bandages, her movements efficient in the dark. He could smell the rain, the wet dust, and the sharp, clean scent of the medicine she used. He watched her work. The firelight caught the high planes of her face, the strong line of her jaw. She was not beautiful in the way of the saloon girls his mother worked with. Her beauty was hard, like the land outside. She finished cleaning the wound and began to apply a fresh poultice. Her fingers grazed his skin. He flinched, not from pain, but from the touch. Her hand stopped. She looked up. Their eyes met in the gloom. His gaze was raw, stripped bare by the fever and the pain. He saw her, really saw her, for the first time. Her eyes were not just hard, they were old. They held a sorrow so deep it looked like bedrock. Her eyes held his. They were dry, unflinching, but he saw the pain in them. He saw the ghosts she had forbidden him to name. He saw the husband, the children, the village. He saw the massacre that had left her alone. Luke felt a sudden, sharp ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. He wanted to look away. It was too much truth, too much grief held in one person. As if she read his mind, her voice cut through the sound of the rain. It was low and cold as the storm. "Don't look away," she whispered. He froze. "If you want to live," Tala said, her black eyes holding him captive, "you must not flinch." He held her gaze. He felt the heat of his own shame, the emptiness of his own life crashing against the solid, terrible weight of hers. He did not blink. He did not turn away. The rain hammered the roof, and the fire cast long shadows that danced on the walls. The night deepened, and in that small, isolated hut, a white man, a cowboy with no past and no future, realized he no longer had any road back. He was in her land, and the only way forward was to keep looking. Luke Harlan's body mended with the stubborn slowness of a dry-rotted rope. The wound in his side closed, pulling the skin tight into a puckered, angry scar. But the weakness clung to him. For the first week after the fever broke, he could do little more than sit against the adobe wall, watching the square of blinding white light that was the doorway. Tala moved in and out of that light, a solid shadow against the glare. She never stopped working. She hauled water in a heavy clay pot, her back straight. She ground corn into meal with a stone mortar and pestle, the rhythmic scrape and crunch filling the silence. She worked on hides, scraping them clean with an obsidian tool, her knuckles white with the effort. He felt useless, a burden. He was a man grown, a cowboy who lived by the strength of his hands and back, and he was being kept like a sick dog. The first time he tried to stand, the world tilted, and he fell hard against the wall. She was outside, and she did not come in. He heard her movements pause, just for a second. And then the scraping of the hide resumed. He was on his own. He understood. He gripped the wall, his knuckles bleeding, and dragged himself upright. He started small. He took the bundle of sticks she used for the fire and, with her knife, began to break them into smaller, usable pieces. His hands shook, and the simple work left him sweating. When she returned, she glanced at the small, neat pile, and then at his raw hands. She said nothing, but that night, she left a small tin of pine resin salve near his blankets. Soon, he was walking, his steps unsteady. He followed her out into the blinding day. The valley they were in was a high, hidden cup in the mountains, walled by red rock. It was stark, but not dead. Creosote bushes gave the air a sharp, clean smell after the rain, and small, hardy plants clung to life in the crevices. He took the water pot from her. She did not release it at first. She just looked at him, her black eyes measuring his strength. He met her gaze. He was not asking permission. He was taking the load. She let go. The walk to the spring was a half-mile, down a winding goat path, by the time he returned. The water sloshing, his wound screaming in protest. He was soaked in sweat. He set the pot down, breathing hard. She was there, watching. He began to work. He helped her dig for roots, his hands blistering in the hard, dry soil. He gathered firewood, stacking it high against the hut, his muscles slowly remembering their purpose. The roof of the hut was leaking in one corner, where the mud plaster had cracked. He found a patch of good clay near the spring and spent 2 days mixing it with dry grass, applying it with his hands, smoothing it until it was solid. She watched him. He was aware of her gaze all the time. It was not like being watched by other men who looked for weakness or challenge. Her gaze was analytical. She was studying him, like she studied the sky for rain or the ground for tracks. He was healing. He was strong enough to leave. He had a pair of worn boots, the clothes on his back, and his health. He could walk out of the valley, find a trail, and be in a town by the end of the week. He could find work, another bounty, another saloon. He did not leave. He did not leave because he had nowhere to go. Dodge, Abilene, Santa Fe, they were just names, places to earn money and spend it, places filled with men like himself, empty and drifting. But he also did not leave because of the woman. She had saved his life, and he owed her a debt. But more than that, she was the first person in his memory who had looked at him without wanting something. She had looked at him and seen, simply, a man, a white man, which she hated, but a man. Tala felt the shift. The man, Luke, was no longer a patient. He was a presence. He was quiet. He did not fill the air with useless words, as white men often did. He worked, he watched, he learned. She still kept her back to him. She still kept the hardness in her eyes, but it was becoming difficult. He was not like the soldiers who had burned her village. He was not like the prospectors who looked at her with greedy, pale eyes. He was quiet, and he was still looking at her. One evening, they sat by the fire. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the mesquite wood. He had been staring into the flames for a long time. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. She did not move, but her hands stilled in her lap. "Why do you stay here?" He pressed on, his voice gentle. "All alone. This land it's hard. You could go to a town, or find your people." Tala turned her head. The firelight carved shadows under her high cheekbones. Her voice, when it came, was flat and sharp as a piece of flint. "I am not something for you to save," she said. He flinched. "I didn't mean... You think because I am alone, I am broken. You think I need a white man to lead me from the desert." She looked at him, and the grief she held back was now a cold, bright anger. "You have nowhere to go. You are dust. But I once had everything. I had a husband. I had a son. I had a people." She gestured to the dark, empty valley around them. "And I lost it, all of it, here. This is my place. My ghosts are here. You do not speak of them, and you do not try to save me from them." Luke said nothing. He looked down at his hands. Ashamed. He had crossed the line she had drawn. He nodded. Once, and the silence returned, heavier than before. That night, the wind came. It was a cold wind, a high country wind that carried the first hint of autumn. It shrieked through the rocks and rattled the door of the hut. Luke lay on his pallet, listening. The fire was low. And then he heard it. Under the scream of the wind, he heard another sound, a low, rhythmic sound. It was choked, desperate. He sat up. Tala was not on her pallet. She was huddled by the cold hearth, her back to him, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. It was not a soft weeping. It was a dry, silent storm of grief, a sound of such profound loneliness that it chilled him more than the wind. He saw her whole story in that small, shaking outline. The husband, the child, the village. All the ghosts she had warned him away from were with her now, in the dark. He wanted to go to her, to put a hand on her shoulder, but he remembered her words. I am not something for you to save. Her Apache hands that touched to know, not to control. He knew his touch would be a kind of control, a kind of pity. It would be a white man's comfort, and it would be wrong. He stayed on his pallet, his heart aching. He sat there for an hour, maybe more, listening to the wind and the sound of a world ending, over and over again. When her sobs finally quieted into ragged breaths, he waited. He lay back down and stared into the dark. Before the sun rose, he got up. She was asleep, or pretending to be. A still bundle of blankets. He quietly opened the door and stepped out into the gray, cold air. His old coat, the one he had been wearing when she found him, was hanging on a peg. It was torn and stained, but it was thick wool. He took it down and folded it. He placed it carefully on the ground by her pallet, near the door, where she would see it when she woke. He did not say a word. He just left it. Then he went out to check the snares he had set, leaving her to her mourning and her ghosts. When he returned, the coat was gone. She was outside, grinding corn. She did not look at him. She did not thank him. But the wall of ice between them felt different. It had a crack in it. She began to teach him. It did not start as a lesson. He was clumsy with the snares, and she grew impatient. You move like a buffalo, she said, snatching a snare from his hand. You leave your smell on the wire. The rabbit knows you are here. She showed him how to rub his hands with dirt and crushed juniper to kill the human scent. She showed him how to see the faint trail a quail leaves, how to read the bend of a blade of grass. Her teaching was harsh. You are stupid, she would say, her voice flat. You look, but you do not see. You listen, but you do not hear. That is how you die on my land. That is how you die stupidly. He took the criticism. He had been arrogant. He realized. He was a cowboy. He knew horses. He knew cattle. He knew how to use a gun. He knew nothing about living. He was the stupid one. She taught him which plants would kill him and which would save him. She pointed out a small, flowering weed. This one, she said. You chew the root. It stops the snakebite poison. If you are fast, she pointed to another, a berry. This one, you eat, you are dead in an hour. He learned to listen. He learned to be silent, to move with the land instead of against it. His world, which had been the saloon and the cattle trail, expanded. He began to see the desert as she saw it, not as an empty, hostile place, but as a full one, crowded with life, secrets, and dangers. One afternoon, they were tracking a deer, moving through a narrow canyon. Luke was walking ahead, his eyes on the tracks. He was proud of himself. He had spotted the trail. Stop! Tala's voice was sharp, but quiet. He froze. What is it? Do not move your foot. He looked down, coiled less than a yard from his boot, almost invisible against the red dust and rock, was a rattlesnake. It was huge, the diamond pattern stark on its thick body. It was coiled, its head up, its tail vibrating in a low, furious buzz that Luke had not even heard. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. His hand jerked toward the empty holster on his hip. He took a half-step back, stumbling. The snake struck. It happened faster than a thought, but Tala was faster. She had been carrying a long, sturdy walking stick. As the snake launched, she moved. She did not jump back. She stepped forward, into the danger, and with a movement of pure, fluid grace, she swung the stick. It caught the snake mid-air, a solid, sickening thwack. The snake's spine snapped, and it fell to the ground, writhing, its fanged mouth gaping. Tala calmly raised the stick and brought the heavy end down, crushing the snake's head against the rock. Luke was breathing hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the dead snake, then at her. She was not even breathing heavily. She was looking at the snake, her face calm, already calculating. She nudged it with her boot. "Good," she said. "We will eat tonight." She looked up at him. His panic was still plain on his face. He felt like a fool, a child. Their eyes met. This time, it was different. He was not looking at her through a haze of fever. She was not looking at him with cold anger. He was looking at her with a raw, profound respect that bordered on awe. She had saved his life again, not with medicine, but with a skill so ingrained it was like breathing. She looked at him, and for the first time, her gaze was not hard. It was deep. She saw his fear, his panic, and his shame, and she saw his gratitude. She saw him. The look held for a long time. The dead snake at their feet, the canyon silent around them. Back at the hut, the tension was thick. They had cooked and eaten the snake meat in silence. It was dark, and the fire was the only light. Luke's shirt had been torn during the encounter, a long rip down the sleeve. He sat awkwardly, trying to mend it with a bone needle and a piece of sinew. He was clumsy, his large, rough hands fumbling with the small needle. After a moment, Tala sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. She put down the pot she was cleaning and came over. "Give it to me," she said. He handed her the shirt. She sat on the floor near the fire, pulling the shirt into her lap. He sat on his pallet, watching her. Her hands moved quickly, surely, the needle flashing in the firelight. Her stitches were small and even. Her fingers brushed against his arm as she turned the shirt. He was wearing a thin undershirt, and her touch was light. Then her hand stilled. She was touching an old scar on his forearm, a jagged white line that ran from his wrist to his elbow. She traced it, her finger rough but gentle. It was not a question, just an observation. The touch, so simple, so accidental, broke something open in him. "I got that in a saloon in Wichita," he said, his voice quiet. "A man broke a bottle. He didn't like the way I looked at his cards." He looked at her hand, still resting on his arm. "My PA, he used to hit me with his belt after he'd been drinking." He had never told anyone that. He looked away from her, into the fire. "I've never," he said, the words thick in his throat. "I've never been touched by anyone, not in my whole life, without being pushed away, or hit, or something." He was ashamed of the confession, but it was the truest thing he had ever said. Tala was quiet. She finished the stitch she was working on. She did not pull her hand away. She looked up, her face serious in the firelight. Her black eyes met his. "The Apache touched to know one another," she said, her voice very soft, "not to control." She held his gaze, and her hand remained on his arm, on the old, white scar. It was not a touch of pity. It was not a touch of possession. It was just a touch, a hand, on an arm. It was a knowing. That night, the air in the hut was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. He lay on his pallet. She did not go to hers. She sat by the low-burning fire, her back straight, her hands in her lap. She was just there, a few feet away. He did not sleep. He was aware of every breath she took. The silence was absolute. No wind, no crying, just the two of them, in the dark, separated by a few feet of packed earth and 1,000 miles of history. He watched her dark outline against the dying embers. He felt the weight of her presence. It was not threatening. It was not comforting. It was just true. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. So he did the only thing he had learned to do. He just looked. He did not let his gaze waver. He watched her, and he let her be seen. Hours passed. The embers faded to gray ash, and the first hint of blue light began to creep into the hut. Tala had not moved. Finally, as the darkness began to lift, she let out a long, slow breath. It was barely a sound, a sigh so quiet it was more feeling than noise. She turned her head, her profile sharp against the growing light. She looked at him, lying on his pallet, his eyes open, watching her. "You are still looking at me," she whispered, her voice husky with the long, silent night. "You have not looked away." The first sound was wrong. It was not the high, thin cry of a hawk, nor the scuff of a lizard on the rock. It was the rhythmic jingle of metal harness and the heavy shod hoof falls of many horses. Tala was on her feet before the sound had even settled. Her body went from rest to a state of absolute, coiled readiness. It was a predator's reflex, but it was born of being preyed upon. "Get your things!" she snapped. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the small hut like a blade. "What is it?" Luke was already rising, his hand instinctively moving to his side, where his pistol was no longer. "Men, white men, from the town!" She was already stuffing a small pouch of dried meat and a water skin into a leather bag. "They are in the valley. They are looking." "How do you know?" "They ride the low trails, slow, not passing through. They are hunting." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in with a strength that surprised him. "You must hide, now." She dragged him from the hut, not toward the spring, but up the canyon wall, to a place he had not seen. It was a dark, vertical slash in the rock, almost completely obscured by a thick growth of desert broom. "In here." Luke looked at the opening. It was barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. It was a tomb. "Tala, this is where my people hid when the soldiers came, the ones who were not fast enough." Her voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "They will not find you. Do not make a sound. Do not move. Do not breathe. Not until I come for you." She shoved him toward it. He squeezed into the fissure, scraping his shoulders on the rough stone. It was deeper than he thought, going back 10, maybe 12 feet, and it was pitch black. He was blind. He heard her pulling the bushes back into place, sealing him in. He was alone in the suffocating, cold darkness. The stone smelled of ancient dust and fear. He could hear his own heart, a stupid, loud drum. He heard the riders before they reached the hut. 4 of them. By the sound. Their voices were loud, confident, invading the valley's silence. "This is it, Arnes. This is the place I saw the smoke." "Ain't much. Just Apache squaw's lean-to." "She was at the trading post 2 weeks back. Traded a prime beaver pelt for flour and salt. She's got something hidden out here." Their boots scuffed the dirt outside his stone prison. Luke held his breath until his lungs burned. "Ma'am?" The voice was falsely polite. "We're a citizens' posse from Silver Creek. We're looking for a fella, a survivor." Luke heard Tala's voice. It was slow, thick, as if she barely understood English. "No one here." "Now, ma'am, we know a bounty outfit got hit by the Sandovals. About 3 weeks ago, we found the bodies, 4 of them, but we also found tracks. A 5th man, wounded, but he got away, headed this way." "No one here," she repeated. "See, we got a problem," the man named Arnes said, his voice hardening. This man, the survivor, we got word he was part of that outfit, but he was also set to double-cross him. He was one of Sandoval's own men, a spy. We figure he's carrying the bounty money they were all after. A fella named Luke Harlan. You seen him?" Luke's blood went cold. A spy? A double-cross? It was a lie, a convenient lie to turn a murdered bounty hunter into a wanted criminal. It meant the Sandovals had friends in Silver Creek. It meant this was not a posse. It was a lynching party. "I see no one," Tala said. "I live here, alone. You leave." "Feisty, ain't she?" Another man laughed. "Arnes, let's just tear the place apart. If he's here, we'll find him." There was a pause. Luke could picture the man. Arnes, staring at Tala, his eyes cold. "No," Arnes said slowly. "If he was here, he's gone. Or he's dead. This squaw ain't smart enough to hide him. But you listen to me, ma'am. We find out you've been helping him, harboring a known killer. We'll come back. And we won't be so polite. We'll burn this little shack of yours to the ground with you in it. You understand me?" Tala said nothing. "Let's go. He ain't here. Wounded man couldn't have made it this far without a horse. He's coyote food." Luke heard them spit, heard them mount their horses. The jingle of harness and the thud of hooves faded, moving back down the valley. He waited. He counted to 1,000, his muscles cramping in the narrow space. The silence of the valley returned, but it was a wounded, violated silence. Finally, he heard the brush being pulled away. He stumbled out into the blinding light, gasping, his legs weak. Tala was standing there. She was not looking at him. She was staring at the tracks the horses had left in the dirt, her face a mask of cold fury. "They will come back," Luke said, his voice hoarse. "Yes." She turned, and her eyes were not the eyes he knew. They were the eyes of the woman who had first found him, the woman who had watched him, expecting him to die. "They think I'm a killer," he said, needing to make her understand. "A thief. It's a lie. I was just riding for the bounty." "It does not matter what you were," Tala said. She walked past him, back to the hut. "You are white. They are white. Their lies are their truth, and they have made you my enemy, too." He followed her into the small, dark shelter. The men had been inside. They had overturned her pallet, kicked her cooking pot. A small, carefully woven basket lay broken in the corner. Tala knelt and picked up the broken pieces. She did not make a sound. She just held them. "Tala," he said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll head north. They won't bother you again." She continued to stare at the broken basket. And then she spoke. "The man who made this basket, he taught me how to find the water. He taught me to sing." She spoke to the broken reeds. Not to him. He was my husband. When the white men came, the ones who wanted to civilize this land, he would not move. He said this was our land, given by the Creator. He said no man could own the rock. She paused, her fingers tracing the broken weave. "They shot him in the back while he was checking his rabbit snares. They said he was a thief, that he was stealing from their land." Luke stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. "I ran. I took my son. He was small, only 5 summers. His name was Taza. He had his father's laugh." She looked up, but not at Luke. Her eyes were focused on a point in the distant past, a place of such pain he could barely stand to watch her. "They found us, the soldiers. They said they were saving us. They said my son needed to be schooled, to be civilized." A single dry sound escaped her, half sob, half laugh. "They took him from me. I fought. I bit one of them. He hit me with his rifle. When I woke up, they were gone, and my son was gone. I never saw him again. I do not know if he is dead, or if he is white." She set the broken pieces down. That was 8 years ago. I have not spoken his name since. Luke felt the world tilt, the ambush, his wound, the vigilantes. It was all nothing. It was air. This was a mountain. This was a canyon of grief so deep it had no bottom. He did not know what to do. His body acted on its own. A sob, thick and heavy, tore from his chest. He sank to his knees. He wept. He wept for her husband, shot in the back. He wept for the 5-year-old boy, Taza, stolen from his mother. He wept for her, left alone with the ghosts and the silence. He wept for the sheer, unending cruelty of it all. Tala watched him. Her face was hard, but her eyes were watching him. This white man, weeping for her Apache ghosts. She did not touch him. She did not offer a single word of comfort. She let him cry, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands. When his sobs finally quieted, his breath coming in ragged gasps, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it was not unkind. Apache men do not cry because they are weak, she said. They cry when there is no one left to hold, when the family is broken. You cry, like one of my people. He looked up at her, his face wrecked, his eyes swollen. The shame he felt was different now. It was not just for her, it was for himself. Tala, he whispered, the words tasting like ash. I saw it, once. I saw it happen. She stilled. What did you see? I was young, 16, maybe, riding with a freight wagon near the Gila River. We saw smoke. The wagon boss, a man named Hatcher, he said it was just soldiers, handling business. But I was curious. I crept away. I hid in the rocks. He closed his eyes, seeing it again. They were burning the village. The wiki-ups. The soldiers were laughing. They were rounding up the women and the children. I saw a boy. He looked about that age, 5 or 6. He was crying for his mother. A soldier just grabbed him, threw him on a wagon. He opened his eyes and forced himself to meet her gaze. And I did nothing. I was scared. I hid in the rocks. I watched them burn it all down. Then I ran. I ran back to the wagon, and I never told anyone what I saw. I did nothing. The confession hung in the small, dark room. It was a worse crime than murder. It was the crime of silence. Tala's face, which had held a flicker of shared grief, turned to stone. The air in the hut became cold, unbreathable. She looked at him, and in her eyes, he was not Luke. He was the soldier. He was Arness. He was the man who hit her with a rifle. He was every white man who had ever stood by and done nothing. She turned and walked out of the hut. Luke did not follow. He sat on the dirt floor, broken, his confession having damned him more completely than any posse ever could. He sat there all day. She did not return. The sun set, and the hut grew cold. He did not build a fire. He deserved the cold. He deserved the dark. He must have slept, because he was startled awake by the sound of the door opening. The first gray light of dawn was silhouetting her in the doorway. She had been out all night, walking, thinking, wrestling with his ghost, and her own. She came and stood over him. He looked up at her. A condemned man. You want forgiveness? She asked. Her voice was flat, empty. He could not speak. He just nodded. Forgiveness is not a word. It is not a thing a priest gives you. She knelt, so her eyes were level with his. It is a life. You live it, or you do not. How? He whispered. You confessed like an Apache. Now you will live like one. You want to be forgiven for doing nothing? Then you must do something. You must become a man, not a shadow. You will stay. You will not run. You will live like my people. She stood. Come. She led him out of the hut. She built a fire, but not in the hearth. She built it in the open, under the wide morning sky. We will bury the past, she said. She went into the hut and came back with two things. One was a small bundle of worn leather. The other was the last thing he owned from his old life, the empty, scarred leather holster he had worn when she found him. She handed him the holster. "This is the man who ran, the man who hid." She looked at the leather bundle in her own hand. "This was my son's, a piece of the shirt he wore. It is all I have. It is the woman who cries in the dark." She threw the bundle into the flames. The leather smoked, curled, and caught fire. She looked at him. Luke's hand was shaking. The holster was his last link to the man called Luke Harlan. He looked at the fire, and he looked at her. He threw it in. They watched the fire consume their pasts. When it was done, only black ash and glowing charcoal remained. Tala dipped her fingers into the cooled charcoal. She took his left hand, palm up. With her blackened thumb, she drew a line across his palm. "This hand will not be empty again," she said. She drew a line on his forehead. "This mind will not hide again." She held out her own hand. He hesitated, then dipped his own fingers in the ash. His touch was clumsy. He took her hand, the hand that had healed him, and drew a line across her palm. "This hand," he said, his voice rough, "will not be alone." He reached up and touched her forehead. "This mind will not be forgotten." They stood there for a long time, marked by the same ash, bound by the same fire. The ritual was not finished. It lasted all day. She showed him how to pray, not with words, but with silence, how to listen to the wind as the voice of the ancestors, how to see the rocks not as dead things, but as witnesses. As night fell, they built the fire again, larger this time. The flames leaped high, painting the red rocks with flickering orange light. The world shrank to this circle of fire. They sat across from each other, as they had on other nights, but everything was different. He was not a white man. She was not an Apache widow. They were two people, marked by ash, who had chosen to stay. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the lines of grief, but now he also saw the lines of strength. He saw the woman who had survived annihilation and had, in one day, given him a chance at a new soul. The silence was full, not empty. It was full of the fire, the stars, and their shared, unbroken gaze. Slowly, deliberately, Luke rose. He walked around the fire. He knelt in front of her. The heat was scorching on his back. He reached out and, very gently, touched her hand, the one he had marked. She did not pull away. Her eyes, black and deep in the firelight, held his. She leaned forward, just an inch. Her voice was a whisper, lost in the crackle of the flames, but he heard it. "Don't look away." He did not. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was a first kiss, and it was 1,000 years old. It was gentle, hesitant. His lips were chapped from the desert air. Hers were soft. It was just a touch. And then she moved. Her other hand, the one he was not holding, came up. It did not touch his face. It gripped the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him close. The kiss changed. It was not gentle. It was fire. It was all the nights of loneliness, all the grief, all the fear. It was a desperate, burning, urgent need. It was two bodies, starved of life, suddenly remembering how to live. It was clumsy and raw, their teeth clicking, their breath mingling. It was a promise, not of softness, but of survival. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. The fire roared. That night, in the dark of the small hut, they came together. It was not like the fevered stories told in saloons. It was awkward. Their clothes were rough. Their bodies were scarred and strange to each other. He was clumsy, and she was tight with years of solitude. But it was honest. Every touch was a question. Every movement was an answer. It was the raw, unadorned, desperate act of two people choosing life. They were not burying the past anymore. They were planting a single new seed in the ashes, and in the darkness, they held on, their hands gripping each other, as if the dawn might never come. The morning light was a thin, gray cut in the darkness of the hut. It was cold. Luke awoke first. He was acutely aware of the body beside him, the scent of her hair, which smelled of smoke and the sharp, clean dust of the valley. He did not move. He lay on his back, staring at the rough wooden beams of the roof. It had happened. The night had not been a dream, not a fever. It was real, and the reality of it settled on him, heavier than any blanket. He was terrified. Not of her, but of the feeling. It was a fragile, dangerous thing in a world that broke everything. He was used to the transactional, hurried encounters in dusty back rooms of saloons. This had been something else entirely. It was quiet and true, and it meant he could never go back. Tala stirred. She awoke the way she did everything, all at once. Her eyes opened, and she was aware. She did not look at him. She rose from the pallet, pulling her blanket around her, and moved to the cold hearth. Her back was to him. The silence in the hut was louder than the night of the storm. It was not the silence of two strangers. It was the heavy, uncertain silence of two people who had shared the one thing they had left. Luke sat up. The marks of ash were still faint on his skin. He watched her back. He saw the tension in her shoulders. She was afraid, too, not of him. She was afraid that this new, thin thread of life was just another thing to be taken. He rose and pulled on his stiff trousers. He reached for the water pot. They had to live. The day had to begin. He went to the spring and returned. She had the fire going, a small, controlled flame. She was grinding corn. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone was the only sound. He sat, watching her hands. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the meal she was preparing. "What happened last night?" she said, her voice flat. "Does not change the world. The fire is out, the ash is cold." She looked up, and her black eyes were as hard and clear as obsidian. "It does not protect you. Those men will come back. And if the town knows I harbored you, if they know I—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. "I know," Luke said. His voice was rough. "I should have left. I am putting you in danger. Every day I am here. I am a risk. Arness," he looked at you. "He already suspects." "Yes." "Tala," he had to ask. It was more important than the vigilantes, more important than the hunger in his belly. "Why? Why did you save me? When you found me, I was just another white man, dying, like the ones who hurt you. Why save me?" Tala stopped grinding. She set the pestle down. She looked at her hands, then at him. Her gaze was unflinching, the one she had demanded of him in the rain. "The first ones," she said, her voice very quiet. "The soldiers, the prospectors, the men in the town, they looked at me. They saw an Apache, they saw a squaw, they saw something to be used, or moved, or killed. They saw a thing they never saw." She paused, as if the word itself was strange on her tongue. "Me." She looked at him, and the hardness in her eyes was gone, replaced by the deep, clear sorrow he had seen before. "When you woke in the fever, and that night, when you saw me, you looked at me. You did not look away. You looked at me like I was a person, like I was real. I had not been seen as real in 8 years. I saved you because you saw me." Luke felt the truth of it settle in his chest. It was simple, and it was heavier than a mountain. They ate in silence, but the silence was different now. It was shared. They needed meat. The snares near the hut were empty, the animals scared off by the vigilantes' horses. They would have to go further, up out of the valley, toward the high ground. Tala packed a small amount of cornmeal and a water skin. She carried her knife. Luke carried the heavy digging stick. which in a pinch could be a club. He still had no weapon. As they climbed, the landscape changed. The red rock and cholla of the low desert gave way to the stubborn green of juniper and scrub oak. The air grew thinner, cooler. They walked for 2 hours, moving with the quiet, ground-eating pace she had taught him. Then they saw it. They were in a small clearing, shielded by rock. A cluster of piñon pines stood, their needles smelling sharp and clean, the smell of resin. "This is their world," Tala whispered, her hand stopping him. He looked where she pointed. Among the trees, the ground was different. "What is it?" "Pine needles," she said. "The ground here is soft. It holds signs." They moved forward, and they found them. Hoof prints, shod horses, not the wild mustangs. These were heavy, grain-fed animals. Luke knelt. 4, maybe 5 riders. They came back, Tala said. She pointed a few yards away. A small circle of blackened stones. The ashes were cold, but not old. Maybe a day, 2 at most. "They did not go back to Silver Creek," Luke said, his voice hardening. "They're still here. They're hunting." "They are hunting you," Tala corrected him, her eyes scanning the ridgeline above them. "And they suspect I know where you are. They circled my valley. They were waiting, checking. They know I cannot live on air. They knew I would have to come out." A cold rage, something Luke had not felt since the ambush, filled him. It was not the hot, panicked anger of a gunfight. It was the cold, killing rage of a man protecting his home. He looked at Tala, her face turned toward the wind, listening, and he knew this was his home. They went back to the hut, moving fast, using the rocks for cover. When they were inside, the door barred. Luke turned to her. "I have to go," he said. It was the hardest sentence he had ever spoken. "It is me they want. If I am gone, they will leave you be. I can draw them off. Head north." He meant it. He would not be the man who hid in the rocks again. He would not do nothing. "No. Tala, they will kill you to get to me. They will burn this place." "No." She stepped in front of him, her body barring the door. She was smaller than him, but at that moment, she was as immovable as the mountain. She grabbed his arm. Her grip was iron. "I know this," she said, her voice low and fierce. This leaving, this silence. When my husband was killed, I was silent. I hid. I saved my son. I thought that was strength. It was fear. When the soldiers took Taza, I fought, and they broke me, and I was silent in the dark for 8 years. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with a fire he had not seen, not even at the fire ritual. "I lost my husband because I was silent. I lost my son because I was weak. I will not lose my home because I am afraid. I will not be silent again. They will not take from me again." She did not say you. She did not have to. He was part of her home. He was what they would not take. The choice was made. It was not his or hers. It was theirs. The work began. They were not running. They were preparing. This was her land, and she would fight for it. "We cannot fight them as they fight," she said. "They have rifles. They have numbers. We have the stone. We have the earth." She was teaching him the Apache way, not the way of ritual, but the way of war. First, the traps. She took him to the narrow goat path, the only easy way into the valley. They will come this way. They are arrogant. She showed him how to build a deadfall, using a heavy boulder, propped up with a complex trigger of sticks and sinew. It would not kill a man, perhaps, but it would break a horse's leg. It would stop them. He dug the pits, his hands blistering, lining the bottoms with sharpened stakes of mesquite, hard as iron. She covered them with a thin layer of brush and dust, so perfect even he could not see where they were. They worked all day, a silent, efficient team. He was the strength, the one who moved the rocks, dug the earth. She was the mind, the knowledge, the hands that tied the intricate knots that would not fail. She brought out a bow. It was old, backed with sinew, but strong. The arrows were tipped with obsidian. "You are clumsy," she said, watching him try to pull the string. "You have the muscle of a white man, thick and slow. You pull with your arm. You must pull with your back. You must breathe." He tried. The arrow flew wide, clattering against the rocks. Again. He tried again. His fingers were raw. His shoulder ached. "You are thinking," she said, frustrated. "You are thinking like a white man. You think you can force the arrow. You cannot. You must. See the place it will land. You must let it go. You are the arrow. Breathe. Luke." He took a breath. He looked at the target, a patch of bark on a dead cottonwood. He stopped thinking. He pulled. He breathed. He saw. And he released. The arrow sank deep into the wood. He looked at her, surprised. A flicker of something. Pride? Crossed her face before she masked it. "It is a start," she said. "Now. Again. 20 times." They worked until the sun touched the high canyon rim. They booby-trapped the trails. They set rock slides that could be triggered from above. They set noisemakers, thin pieces of sinew strung with shells and bones, hidden in the brush, that would warn them of any approach. Luke Harlan, the bounty hunter, was gone. He was learning to be a warrior. He was learning the Apache way. That night, they fell onto their shared pallet. They were not just tired. They were exhausted, their bodies aching, their hands raw. The hut was secure. They had done all they could. The danger was outside, coiled in the dark, waiting. But inside the hut, the fear was gone. Luke turned to her. In the dim light from the dying embers, he saw the lines of fatigue on her face, the smudge of dirt on her cheek. He reached out and gently brushed it away with his thumb. She did not flinch. She leaned into his touch. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, fiery crash of the night before. There was no urgency, no grief. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was the kiss of two people who had made a choice, who had worked together, who had built a defense with their own hands. They made love again. This time, there was no awkwardness, no fumbling. They knew each other's bodies. He knew the scar on her shoulder from the soldier's rifle. She knew the puckered, angry mark on his side, the one her own hands had healed. He moved slowly, with the same control she had taught him with the bow. He learned the rhythm of her body, the places that made her sigh, the way her hands gripped his back. It was not a taking. It was a sharing. It was slow and deep and knowing. It was quiet. They had moved beyond the need for words. Their love was not a thing said. It was a thing done. It was in the shared work of setting a trap. It was in the feel of his hand on her back as they climbed the rocks. It was in the look they shared when the arrow finally hit the mark. It was in the way she leaned against him in the dark, her body fitting against his, two broken pieces that, for now, were making a whole. He held her afterward, her head resting on his chest, her breathing slow and even. He listened to the night sounds of the valley, but now he was listening with her ears. He heard the wind, the far-off call of an owl. He was not afraid. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was on his land. He was with his woman, and he was ready. It came just after dawn. The warning was not a shout, but a sound that did not belong. The sharp, dry rattle of shells on sinew. It was the noisemaker Luke had set on the low trail. Tala was instantly awake, her hand closing on the bow she kept beside the pallet. Luke was on his feet, his heart a cold hammer in his chest. The silence that followed was worse than the rattle. It was a listening silence. Then, from the goat path, came the sound of a horse screaming in pain and a man's curse. "The deadfall," Luke whispered. "They are stopped," Tala said, her voice a low vibration. "But not for long. They know we are here. They know we are waiting." She moved to the door, a quiver of arrows slung over her shoulder. Luke grabbed the heavy digging stick, his only weapon. He felt naked without a firearm. He felt the old panic, the urge to find a rock to hide behind. He looked at Tala. She was not hiding. She was standing in the center of the hut, her body poised, her eyes on the door. She was the mountain. He forced his breath to slow, as she had taught him. He was not the arrow. He was the stone. He would not be moved. The sound of boots on the trail, heavy, angry. They were on foot now, having left their horses. "Harlan!" The voice was Arness. It was not polite this time. It was a roar. "We know you're in there, and we know you're with the squaw." Luke and Tala exchanged a look. This was it.
"Come on out, Harlan, you and your whore, or we burn you out."
Tala walked to the door. She did not open it wide. She pulled the heavy wooden bar and opened it just enough to stand in the frame, her body blocking the dark interior. Luke moved to stand directly behind her, his hand on her shoulder. He could feel the tension in her, a wire pulled taut. There were 4 of them. Arness was in front, his face purple with rage. His hat was gone, and his duster was torn. The man beside him, a burly, bearded man Luke did not know, was nursing a bleeding hand. "Well, well," Arness sneered, his eyes flicking from Tala to Luke, who was half hidden in the shadow. "The rat finally comes out of his hole, and he's found another rat to hide with." "Leave," Tala said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried in the cold morning air. "This is my land. You are not welcome." The bearded man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your land? You Apaches don't own land. You're just vermin, and we're here to clear you out, along with him." Arness raised his rifle, the barrel pointing steadily at Tala's chest. "Step aside. Ma'am, we want him. Harlan's a wanted criminal, a fugitive. Ran with the Sandoval gang, killed his own partners, and stole their bounty. We're taking him back to Silver Creek for a trial. A quick one." Tala did not move. She was a statue carved from the red rock. "I said, step aside." Arness growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "She's got nothing to do with this," Luke said, his voice coming out stronger than he felt. He stepped out from behind her, moving to stand slightly in front of her. He held his hands out, empty, the digging stick left inside. He was shielding her with his body. "The lies you're telling, that's between you and me. Let her go. She found me. She healed me. That's all. She's innocent." "Innocent?" Arness spat. "She's harboring a fugitive. She's an Indian. There ain't no innocent ones." "Look," Luke said, his mind racing. He saw the coldness in Arness's eyes. He saw the other men, their rifles also rising. They were not here for a trial. They were here for a hanging. And they would kill her as easily as they would kill him. He had to do it. The one thing he had left. The one thing that might save her. "All right," Luke said, raising his hands higher. "All right, you win. I'll come. I'll go with you." He looked at Arness, forcing his voice to be steady. "I'll surrender. No tricks. You have my word. Just let her live. Let her stay here. She won't say anything. She's no threat to you." Arness smiled, a thin, cruel twisting of his lips. He looked at the bearded man. "He'll surrender. What I tell you, he's a coward, just like the rest of 'em." He looked back at Luke. "That's a nice offer, Harlan, but I don't think so. We can't have witnesses, can we? And we can't have his Apache whore running off to the soldiers, telling lies about us." He raised the rifle, aiming it not at Luke, but straight at Tala's face. "We'll take you both, him for the rope, her for the boys." It happened so fast, Luke's mind could not catch up. Tala had never stopped being a warrior. His surrender, his words, his sacrifice. It was a white man's solution. It was meaningless. It was another form of silence. As Arness spoke, she moved. She shoved Luke hard, sending him stumbling back into the hut, out of the line of fire. In the same motion, she had an arrow nocked. She did not pull to her cheek. She drew and released in a single, fluid act of violence. The bowstring sang a low, deadly note. The bearded man, the one who had laughed, screamed. It was a high, thin sound. The arrow had gone through his right hand, the one holding his rifle. Pinning his hand to the wooden stock, he dropped the gun, staring at the black obsidian tip and his own blood, his face a mask of white shock. The other two men, who had been relaxed, confident, panicked. They fumbled with their rifles, not expecting a fight.
"She's armed!"
one shouted, diving behind a rock. Arness was the only one who held his nerve. He fired. The shot was deafening in the small valley. The bullet splintered the door frame where Tala's head had been a second before. She was already moving, diving to the side, rolling, and coming up with another arrow.
"Get her! Kill the bitch!"
Arness roared, levering another cartridge into his rifle. But the fight was already over. The men were terrified. They had come to hang a single, wounded man and terrorize a lone woman. They were not prepared for an Apache warrior on her own land. The man with the arrow in his hand was sobbing, trying to pull the shaft out. The other two were firing wildly, their bullets chipping stone high above the hut.
"Fall back!"
Arness shouted, his face contorted in disbelief and rage. He fired one last, angry shot at the hut. "Fall back to the horses!" He grabbed the wounded man and began to drag him back up the trail. The other two followed, scrambling over the rocks, their dignity gone.
"This ain't over! Harlan!"
Arness screamed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls as they retreated.
"You hear me? This ain't over! We're going back! We're bringing the whole damn town! We're gonna burn this whole valley to the bedrock! You and your squaw, you're dead! You're dead!"
Their footsteps faded. The sound of their panic, their curses, and their threats disappeared down the trail. Silence. The valley was still. The only sound was the high, thin sobbing of the wounded man, growing fainter and fainter. Luke was on the floor of the hut, his ears ringing from the gunshot. He was covered in dust. He scrambled to his feet. "Tala?" She was already at the door, her bow still in her hand, watching them go. She did not lower the bow until the last sound was gone. The adrenaline held them for a long moment. He looked at her. She had done it. She had saved them. She had fought. Then the bow slipped from her fingers. It clattered on the stone step. Her shoulders began to shake.
"Tala,"
he said, moving toward her. She turned. Her face, which had been a mask of cold, warrior's rage, was crumbling. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a sudden, bottomless despair. She whispered. And then she broke. It was not the silent weeping he had heard in the dark. It was a complete, agonizing collapse. A sob tore from her, a sound of such profound loss that it physically hurt him to hear it. She fell against him, her hands grabbing the front of his shirt, her face burying itself in his chest. She wept. She wept for the hut. She wept for the valley. She wept for the quiet, the safety, the one small place in the world that had been hers. Arness's threat was not a lie. They would be back. They would come with 50 men. They would come with torches. "It is all gone," she cried, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I have lost it. Again. I have nothing. I have lost my home. I have nothing left." Luke's arms went around her, pulling her tight. He held her as she shook, his own heart breaking. She had fought so hard. She had survived so much, only to have this last, small piece of her life torn away. He let her cry. He just held her, his hand on the back of her head, his cheek resting on her hair. He stood there, a rock for her to break against. When her sobs finally began to quiet, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, he did not let her go. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and hard, not with anger, but with a certainty he had never felt before. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her eyes broken. "He said they would come back," Luke said. "He said they would burn this valley. He said they would take you." He tightened his grip, his gaze holding hers. "He is wrong. I will not let them. I will not let anyone take you from this place, from this earth. I will not let them take you from me." She stared at him, her breathing still catching in her chest. "You have not lost everything," he said. "You have not lost me, and I have not lost you." He kissed her forehead, a hard, brief press of his lips. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a vow, a seal. "Now," he said, stepping back, his hands still holding her arms. "We have to work. We have to go." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The warrior was returning, the grief being packed away, deep inside. "Go where? They will hunt us." "To the high places," she said, her voice hoarse, but stronger. "To the mountains, my ancestors. There are caves, places the soldiers never found, a place to be." "Then we leave," Luke said. "But we leave nothing for them, not one thing." Tala looked at her home, the pallet they shared, the stone hearth, the walls that had kept her safe. She nodded. "Nothing." "It was a funeral. They packed what they could carry, the water skins, the dried meat, the cornmeal, her knife, his digging stick, her bow, and the last of her arrows, the blankets from their pallet." Then Luke took an ember from the hearth. He held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. She took the small, glowing piece of wood. She walked to the corner of the hut, where her sleeping pallet lay. She looked at it for 1 second. She dropped the ember. The dry ticking caught fire instantly. They stepped outside and watched. The flames licked up the dry wooden walls. They did not speak. The smoke, thick and black, rose into the pure desert sky, a signal of their defeat and their survival. Luke went to the traps they had set. He sprung them, one by one, destroying their own work, leaving no sign. He kicked rocks over the bloodstain where the bearded man had stood. They watched until the roof fell in, a shower of sparks and smoke. There was nothing left but a smoking black circle on the valley floor. "It is done," Tala said. Luke shouldered the heavy pack. He held out his hand. Tat first. She did not take it. She looked at her smoking home, her face unreadable. Then her fingers closed around his. Her hand was small, rough, but strong. "Now," she said, turning her back on the ruins. "We go, the Apache way." They did not look back. Together, they began to climb, leaving the valley behind, heading for the high, unforgiving rocks of the mountains, disappearing into the land itself. The journey was a blur of stone and sky. They climbed for 2 days, moving past the limits of the world Luke had known. They left the red canyons and entered a realm of gray granite, stunted pines, and wind. The air was so thin it bit the lungs. Tala moved with a certainty that was ancient. She was not just walking, she was returning. She led him to a place that was not on any white man's map, a high shelf of rock, hidden by a natural curtain of stone, that overlooked the entire desert, and in the back of this shelf was a shadow. It was a cave, not a small fissure like the one he had hidden in, but a deep, hollowed-out opening in the mountain's heart, the ancestral place she had spoken of. They entered. The air inside was cold, dead. It was a cold that had lived there for 1,000 years. It smelled of dust, dry rock, and something else, a faint, lingering trace of old smoke. The walls were black in places, from fires lit by people long dead. It was a tomb, but it was safe. They made their home. It was a hard life, harder than the valley. The cold was a constant enemy. They lived by the rhythm of a small, smoky fire that Luke kept fed with deadfall from the twisted, high-altitude pines. But they were peaceful. Here, there was no sound of shod horses, no jingle of harness, No shouting voices. There was only the wind. It was a vast, clean, screaming sound. The voice of the mountain itself. They were above the world. They were hidden. Luke's new life was defined by this high, cold place. He hunted. He took the bow, and with the patience she had taught him, he learned to wait. He would lie for hours on a ridge, motionless, until a bighorn sheep or a high-country rabbit presented itself. He learned to use every part of the animal, the meat for food, the hide for warmth, the sinew for thread and bowstrings. He was no longer a cowboy. He was a hunter. He was a provider. Tala worked beside him. She had a small, precious pouch of seeds and roots she had grabbed before they burned the hut, in a small, protected patch of earth near the cave's mouth, where the sun could reach. She planted her garden. She tended her medicines, her hands coaxing life from the thin, rocky soil. She scraped the hides he brought back, her movements sure and rhythmic, the same movements she had made in the valley. They were a team. They were two people, alone, against the sky. They spoke little, but they no longer needed to. They moved around each other in the confines of the cold cave with an easy grace. He would mend a trap. She would stir the pot. He would bring wood. She would lay out the blankets. One night, the first snow of the high winter began to fall. It was not a gentle dusting. It was a silent, heavy curtain of white, sealing the cave's mouth. The fire was the only point of light and warmth in a universe of cold. They sat close to it, wrapped in the stiff, warm hides. Luke was sharpening her knife, the scrape of stone on steel a small, companionable sound. He had been quiet for a long time, watching her. Her face was illuminated by the fire. The lines of grief were still there, but they were softer. The hardness in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, clear calm. She was his. This life was theirs. He set the stone down. Tala. She looked up, her hands still. He had to ask. It was a question that had lived in his heart for months, a question born of his new self. If I had been born Apache, he said, his voice low. If I had been one of your people, would you have married me? He expected her to be silent. He expected her to turn away. Instead, a small, slow smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was a rare, beautiful thing, like the first flower of spring. She looked at him, her eyes holding his, and the smile was knowing and warm. You are not good enough with the bow, she said, her voice soft, teasing. You walk too heavy, and you are still not good at listening to the wind. You hear the sound, but you do not hear what it says. Luke's face fell, but she reached out and touched his hand. But, she said, her voice losing its tease, becoming serious, you know how to keep a promise. You did not run. She held his gaze. My husband, he was a great warrior, but he died because he believed his words were enough. You live your words. That is the Apache way. That is the way of a man. She did not answer his question directly, but she had answered it. Luke's heart felt full, too full for the small cave. He took her hand, the one that rested on his. We don't need a priest. We don't need a town. She looked at him, her eyes clear. No, we do not. They waited for the full moon. When it came, it silvered the new snow, turning their mountain fortress into a palace of white light. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. They went out onto the high ledge, the one that overlooked the world. The sky was not black, it was a deep, velvet blue, and it was alive with stars. It looked like the Creator had spilled a bag of diamonds across the heavens. The silence was absolute, a holy, frozen thing. They stood opposite each other. There were no friends. There was no family. There was no preacher, no chief. There was only the mountain and the moon and the witnesses of 1,000 ancestors in the stone and the stars. Luke had nothing to give her. No ring, no gold. He had only his hands, scarred from the traps in the bowstring, and his word. He took her hands. They were cold. "Tala," he said, his voice thick in the thin air. "I was a ghost. I was empty. You gave me a life. You taught me how to see. You taught me how to fight. And you taught me how to not look away." He squeezed her hands. "I am not a great warrior. I am not Apache. But I am your man. I will be your home. I will be your people. I will not run. I will not be silent. I swear this before all this." Tala looked at him. Her face was serene in the moonlight. She did not weep. Her eyes were as bright as the stars. "Luke Harlan," she said, and it was the first time she had used his full name since the fever. It sounded like a new word. "I was a ghost, too. I was a woman made of ash and memory. You sat in my fire. You wept for my ghosts. You marked me with your promise." She raised her hand and touched the faint, old scar of ash on his forehead. "You are not Apache, but you are my husband. My heart is your home. My body is your people. I will not be silent. I will not be alone. I will not look away." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of fire and desperation. It was a kiss of peace, of certainty. It was cold and true, and it sealed their vow. They stood on the mountaintop for a long time, holding each other, just two small, warm figures in a vast silver world, married by the sky. The winter was hard. It was a time of cold and hunger and endurance, but they were not alone. They were together. They survived. And then the spring came. It did not come gently. It came like a sudden, violent crack in the ice. The snow melted, the water rushing down the mountainside in torrents, and with the water came life. The high gray rock, which had been dead, suddenly burst with color. Small, stubborn flowers pushed up between the stones. And one day, Luke returned from a hunt to see the most impossible sight. The cacti, which had been gray, spiny skeletons, had exploded in a riot of waxy, deep purple flowers, life in its most defiant form. They had left the cold cave. With the spring, they had built a new home, a small lodge, a wickiup of pine boughs and the cured hides from his hunts. It was built against a sheer wall of rock, sheltered from the wind, facing the rising sun. It was not a hiding place. It was a home. Tala was inside, sewing a new pair of moccasins for him. He watched her as he entered. The light from the opening fell on her. She seemed different. The harshness of the winter was gone. Her body, which had been thin and hard, was fuller. Her movements were softer, more deliberate. He sat beside her, handing her a brace of rabbits. She smiled her thanks. He watched her hands as she worked, and then he looked at her belly, which swelled with a gentle, undeniable curve under her deerskin dress. She had not told him. She had not needed to. It was a quiet, growing thing, a secret between her and the land and the spring. Luke felt his breath catch. He looked at her face. She was watching him, her eyes calm, waiting. He did not feel fear. He did not feel the panic of a man trapped. He felt awe. He felt a joy so fierce and bright it hurt, like looking at the sun. This was Taza's ghost, finally given peace. This was the future. This was their new people, a people of one beginning. He did not speak. He knelt. He knelt on the earthen floor of their new home. He, Luke Harlan, the ex-cowboy, the drifter, the man who had been nothing, knelt before his Apache wife. He reached out a trembling hand and laid it on her belly. He felt it, the warmth, the life, their life. He bent his head and pressed his lips to the deerskin, a gentle, reverent kiss, a vow to this new soul, a promise that it would never be stolen, never be lost, a promise that it would be born free, on its own land. The story ends, but it also begins. The final scene is not in the lodge. They are on the mountaintop. It is the hour before dawn. The world below them is a sea of black, broken shadows. They are standing hand in hand, looking east. He is taller, leaner, his hair longer. He looks as if he was carved from the mountain himself. She stands beside him, her body proud, her hand in his. And then the sun. It is not a gentle rising. It is a battle. The first light is a spear, a crack of molten gold that stabs the darkness. It breaks itself on the horizon, and then it floods the world. The light pours over the broken canyons, filling them, turning the gray rock to gold, the purple shadows to warm red. The light wins. It overcomes all the brokenness, and it washes over them. Two figures, standing against the new, bright sky. We needed no blessing from anyone. We needed each other, and the Apache never look away. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's connect. Your thoughts mean the world to us, so please share them. And do not forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories like this one.